We're really part of this sandwich generation where we're kind of in the middle, many of us raising children at the same time as having aging parents, and it can feel like there's no time for you. And the biggest thing I see is women just under a relentless amount of stress and kind of giving to everyone and not always finding enough time for themselves. So I have a kind of routine that I share with my clients in terms of morning and evening.
It isn't about being perfect. It's about being better. Hello, my name is Dr. Stephanie Estima, and I host expert discussions with thought leaders in all facets of health, including nutrition, fitness, hormones, stress management, performance, recovery, longevity, health span, and energy production. On this show, we discuss complex science, but then we also alchemize it into actionable, everyday living. The ultimate goal with the show is to assist you in making informed decisions about your health and to catapult you into being the hero in your own life. Hey Betties, welcome back to another episode of Better with Dr. Stephanie. It's me, as always, your host, Dr. Stephanie Estima. Today, I am welcoming my friend, Angela Foster, to the show. Angela is an award-winning nutritionist, health performance coach, speaker, and host of the top-rated podcast, High Performance Health. She's also the creator of Biosyncing, which is a unique program designed for women who want to optimize their physical, mental, and spiritual health for high performance in business and in life. Angela and I met about probably a little over a year ago now. We were both speakers in London, United Kingdom, something called Health Optimization Summit, and really connected. There's a lot of serendipities and a lot of synchronicities between the work that we do. In today's conversation, we talk about nervous system regulation. We talk about burnout. We talk about that stress sandwich in midlife. And we really get into this concept of capacity for compassion for ourselves, capacity to deal with the extra demands that are placed on perimenopausal women in midlife. We talked about recovery and micro recoveries and micro resting through the day. And Angela shared what she called caps for, cap on and cap off. So her morning routine, what are the, 1 to 5 minute mini routine in the morning that can sort of set the tone for the day. And the same is true in the evening. And so we go through these CAP acronyms that she has come up with. And then we get into, in that theme of capacity, we get into a conversation around her story of burnout, being hospitalized, being put on antidepressants and antipsychotics, and being diagnosed with bacterial and viral pneumonia. It is a horrendous, with 3 children under the age of 4. It is a horrendous story, but one that I'm happy to report ends well. And so we talk about her descent into that and what were some of the aha moments that she had and the changes that she made to her life in order to come out on the other side, happy, healthy, strong. And so we go through that and we sort of meander on a bunch of different topics as we go through her story, which I think that you'll find incredibly inspiring. And I know that you'll be able to see at least part of yourself. You might not need to be a former corporate lawyer with 3 children under 4 with viral and bacterial pneumonia on antipsychotic meds in the hospital contemplating suicide, but there is certainly going to be parts of her story, maybe many parts of her story that you identify with. I know I certainly have felt at that very low like she has and at many points in my life. So I really valued the transparency with which she brought to the conversation and some of the lessons through the learning and on the other side of it. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Angela Foster. All right, Angela Foster, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's great to be here.
We met last year now. We posted a panel together and it was lovely to connect with you because there's so much serendipity and overlap in terms of our body of work. And I, like you, started off talking a lot about menstrual cycle syncing and the importance of pairing nutrition and fitness to the menstrual cycle. And then now as a woman in perimenopause myself, certainly very interested in perimenopausal research and perimenopausal applications as well. So I wanted to maybe start off with, for the women who are in midlife, who are listening to the show, we lovingly call them our Betties. So for our Betties who are in midlife, in your opinion, in terms of what you've seen, in terms of people that you've worked with, what are the non-negotiable habits that a woman in midlife needs to master and adopt?
Great question. And I'm there with you. And I think I call it the messy. It's like Robin Sharma's messy middle, isn't it? Everyone tells me that when you get through the other side, post-menopause, that's where women are so much happier and all these lovely things. But I think we all
It's
have
the
to
after
navigate.
party.
It's the after party. Exactly.
Everyone wants to go to the after party, right?
It's so true. It's such a good way to describe it. We've just got to kind of navigate the road there. I would say, do you know, one of the things I think is the most important during this period of transition is to connect with yourself. I think that's really, really fundamental. And I think we can lose our way a little bit because you and I talked about it, Stephanie, when you came on my show, that we're really part of this sandwich generation where we're kind of in the middle, many of us raising children at the same time as having aging parents, and it can feel like there's no time for you. And the biggest thing I see is women just under a relentless amount of stress and kind of giving to everyone and not always finding enough time for themselves. So I have a kind of routine that I share with my clients in terms of morning and evening. I talk about capping off your day and actually kind of capping on as well, which I can talk you through. So that would be one of the key things for me. And then from a fitness and health perspective, dialing in the behaviors that both of us talk about in terms of making sure you're optimizing for your muscle mass, you're doing some aerobic exercise, you're eating in a way that's working with your hormones, and that you are prioritizing sleep, because I think sleep is something that escapes so many women. So those would be the 4 keys for me.
Beautiful. Well, let's dive into all of those. And first, everyone always wants to know, tell me exactly what you're capping on and capping off, like your routine in the morning, routine in the evening, and then we can double click on the exercise piece, the cardiorespiratory piece, and the meals.
Sure, I'd love to. So this is really a way of starting and bookending your day that I have found just helps whatever goals you have, whether they're health goals or you're trying to achieve big things in life. It just brings you balance and clarity. So the cap that you do in the morning is, for me, the first C is connection. So how do I connect with myself? And I don't want to introduce this as like, oh my God, we're going to go and do a 20-minute transcendental meditation or something like that you don't feel you have time to do. This could be as easy as 1 minute where you check in with you and go into your heart space and your intuition. So for me, a really beautiful thing that I do is a lovely segue is I'll just light a candle and connect with myself. And if it's only 1 minute, I know that I've done that today. And I do think this will probably come through as we're talking. Consistency is a really big win in many areas that we're about to speak about. So the first thing is to connect. And then the A is to affirm who you're being. Because I think, again, midlife is a huge opportunity to really kind of, yes, reinvent ourselves, but also connect with who we're being and who we're becoming. And so affirming who you're being and embodying that throughout your day can be like your inner compass, if you like. And so that A, and the A in both of these caps, I would say also stands for all day. So don't just like recite an affirmation in the morning, but think about who you're being throughout the day, whether you want to be a great parent to your children, how you want to show up in your business, whatever it is for you. And then the P represents the power move for the day. And again, this doesn't have to be something big. It could actually be having some time for yourself. It could be stepping outside for 5 minutes. It could be giving your kid a hug. It could be doing something amazing, right? Going and delivering a big presentation that moves the needle on your business. But it's whatever is that power move for you after you've done that connection, so that you're really using this as a compass to frame your day. And then the evening cap is a way of bookending. So the C in the evening is celebrate your wins and your lessons. And this is where you can turn anything that went wrong, any kind of failures, any missteps into things that you learn and grow from. So we're celebrating both. And with the wins, I would say celebrate the small things. If you did do that thing for you that you connected and wanted to do for yourself this morning, then celebrate that. The A here is appreciate. And the reason that I say the A's are all day is gratitude has so much science, right? So we can appreciate 3 things we're grateful for in the evening. I like to write these out, but we also do them around the family dinner table. You know, we'll go around and ask, what are you grateful for today? And the reason I say it's an all day thing is that if you approach your life from a place of gratitude, you just feel so much more sense of oneness, both with yourself and with other people. And we know it's a big amplifier and has so many benefits according to the science. And then the P is to prioritize. And this is really just to list your 1 to 3 priorities for tomorrow. So it's not a to-do list. It's not a capture list where you put everything in. It's like, what will move the needle the most for me tomorrow? And this is also a great sleep hack, because if you've got it out of your head and written down, then you know that you've got tomorrow taken care of. And when you wake up, you know what you need to focus on in alignment with whatever your goals and values are. So that's kind of the cap on, cap off. And everyone that I've used this with loves it when they start to really embody it, and they get a lot of benefits, because one of the things I say is in the evening, obviously you're journaling. In the morning when you're connecting, if you can start to write the moment after you have that connection, you'll get even more insights into your inner world. So yeah.
I love that. And I have to tell you, with all transparency and honesty for the show and just for you, this is something that I would have totally rolled my eyes at like a couple of years ago. I would have been like, okay, yes, I'm going to send an affirmation. I am Gal Gadot. I don't know, like say something that I didn't really believe in. But there is quite a bit of, it's subtle in the beginning. I think in the beginning, at least for me, when I started, so my gratitude practice is actually a shared Google, are they called sheets? It's like the Excel.
Oh yeah,
Google
Sheets.
I think it's a Google Sheet. Okay, so it's a Google Sheet that me and my husband have created for each other, and we actually share the document. And then in there, it's like gratitude for Stephanie, that he will, like a cell that he'll fill out. And then I have gratitude for Giovanni, and then gratitude for others. So usually like members of my team, and then gratitude for things, whatever it is. And then it's the top one. I usually have just one thing, top one thing that has to get done today. And then, other things that if they happen, great. If not, they get bumped to tomorrow. But that has been such a grounding piece, a grounding practice for me. And then I've, my AV producer who's listening to this and is producing this also knows that in our company, we also do a weekly wins on Friday. Like, what were your wins this week? And I have to give him credit where he's due. He's always a star. He always does it. Sometimes I even forget that it's Friday and to put my wins in there. But it is such a transformative process when you start focusing on the good stuff, because it is like, Lord knows, social media and the news, like they don't report on the planes that land. It's always catastrophizing. Everything is coming to an end. And it's very much ingrained in our neurobiology to focus on the things, like on the pain. It's very like we always want to move away from pain, right? We don't necessarily move towards pleasure inherently unless we train that exercise. So I really appreciate what you're saying here with the cap on, cap off. So connecting with yourself in the morning, affirm your being all day, and your power move in the morning, and then the evening, celebrate your wins, appreciate and prioritize 1 to 3 things for tomorrow. I think that these are really, they're almost simple, like they're so elegant and they're simple and they're so easy to dismiss, but they have such profound impacts on the way that we view the day, ourselves, and our capacity to problem solve.
Mm-hmm. So much so. And I think that's the thing. And it just gets better and better with time. And it's so simple. Do you know what I mean? And even with the affirmation, right, I think these have been really misunderstood, because so often people think I've got to say these crazy things like I am a multimillionaire or I am this. And it's not really about that, right? It's like, let's just simplify it. Maybe you want to get fitter this year. So you're saying, every day I'm getting stronger and stronger. That's like a great thing to say. Just affirm who you're being. That's what I mean. It's just something so simple that can guide you in the day. And as you say, keep in the gain, right? There's a great book, The Gap and the Gain. And I think it's so easy with all that fear mongering and fear-based stuff that we can just be in the gap the whole time. And what we're really trying to do is just to set that inner compass so that we're seeing and starting to build the reality we want.
And I think the other thing, especially for women, and I'd love for you to comment on this, is that it starts to develop a relationship of love and appreciation for yourself. Like, we are taught in society to hate ourselves, to be competitive with other women, that we are not pretty enough, not smart enough, not skinny enough, not whatever. Somehow we're not enough. And I think that when we start practices like this, you start to say, oh yeah, I really was this was a great mothering moment for me. Let's say there's an issue with your children, or this is a really great this is a really great contribution that I made to my family, my job, my friend. I was, listen to my friend go through whatever it is. So I think that it also starts to begin to harness a relationship of appreciation and respect for yourself. And then all of the other behaviors, all of the other habits that we're trying to enact in our lives becomes easier because we are developing a sense of trust and a sense of appreciation for the person that we are.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I know for some people, they might be listening to this and thinking that feels hard, but it's like anything, you can practice it. Do you know what I mean? And you can choose it. And this is coming from somebody who went through so many mental health problems that, I'd literally created a prison in my own mind where I just wanted my life to end because I disliked myself so much. And I think these are simple things, but if you start to embody them every day, you'll see a change. And just try it. That would be my thing, right? Just give it a go. And even just try one piece of it.
So I sort of made a joke about like my affirmations before, where I would just sort of like, yeah, okay, I'm like, I don't know, I'm like I said, Gal Gadot. But one of the affirmations that I really do like, which is non-specific, but it does, at least it's meaningful to me. So I'll share it with you and with our audience, which is just health flows from me and through me. So I have just a simple statement. It doesn't mean like I have X amount. My waist is X amount of inches. My weight is X amount of, it's none of that. It's just health flows from me and through me. And it's really just at least for me, it's just like a philosophical premise that my body's default is health. My body wants to be healthy. My body strives to be healthy and balanced. It's just I have to give her the right tools. So health is always flowing from me. That's sort of so I don't know if that's helpful or if that's meaningful to you or to the audience, but I just thought I would share.
Super. Yeah, I love it. It's super meaningful to me. And I love it. And it's just that sense of embodiment as well. Do you know what I mean? And you also remove the ego from it, because as you're saying, like if you're looking at certain metrics, like I am this or my waist size is this, it's just so tightly wrapped up in the ego that when we remove that, we actually just get to our inner being, and it is flowing from us. And we know that just that psychology has the power to make epigenetic changes, right, in your body. If you believe You're healthy, then you will be healthy in general.
I love that. Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned your story, which I definitely want to dig into because it is a fascinating one and one of triumph, which I think everybody likes to hear. A success story. We always root for the underdog. We always root for the solution. Just before we get there, I wanted to just building on this cap on, cap off. You mentioned, or we were talking in the pre-chat, that you wanted to make sure that we talked about HRV and nervous system regulation. And I think that both, like the starting on the cap on, cap off routine, I think actually really nicely feeds into this. Like nervous system regulation is the key for female health and longevity. That is my very strongly held philosophical premise as well. And I would love for you to expand on why that is.
Yeah, so important. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's the most overlooked thing. I think that our nervous systems are just under so much pressure as women. Apart from anything else, you know what it's like, Stephanie, as a mum, you just hold all these things in your head, right? If your child's upset or they need something for school, you're just kind of carrying around all of these things. And when we look at percentage of burnout rates, they're higher in women. The mental stress, even some of the issues we'll struggle with, like headaches, for example, they're tightly linked, this stress, with our hormones and with things like progesterone, whether we have a menstrual cycle or we're going through that perimenopause transition, which can be a really difficult time when we see baseline rates of cortisol increasing, we see inflammation increasing, we have, poorer insulin sensitivity, and stress is feeding into all these things. And I think that heart rate variability is something that we can track. It's very non-invasive, it's easy to measure, and it gives a really good reflection of how much capacity we have in any one day. And for those listening, for your audience, if they're not familiar yet, I'm sure many of them and most will be familiar with heart rate variability. But what we're looking at here is we're not looking at your heartbeat, right? Which is, if we look at your resting pulse, how many times it beats in a minute. If you took that and you found that you had 60 beats per minute, it would be reasonable to assume that your heart's beating once every second. That's not the case. And what we see is interbeat variability or variation between beats. And in general, and obviously there's extreme cases where this isn't true, but in general, the higher the variability, that is a marker of good nervous system management. And so we all need a degree of resiliency. And that's another thing that we see that goes down in perimenopause, is we have this sort of loss of resiliency and increased anxiety. So we can have a look at heart rate variability to see what is our capacity like. And if it's not and it's slipping, we can actually address it through lifestyle behaviors to help to improve it. And we know some of it will be going down as a function of age, but also if we're under high stress and the heart senses this sense of disorder within or around your environment or within the body, then it will try to create order. And so it will regulate much more, and it will become more like a metronome, which was never how it was designed to be. So it's a really good marker, if you like, that is non-invasive that we can look at.
My HRV is usually measured. I have my Oura ring on. I also have a sleep system that tells me what my HRV is, and I actually like to pair the two. How do you measure your HRV?
Yeah, so I measure in the same way as well. So I'm recently trying out the Ultra Human Ring. I use Aura, use Whoop. Those are really great. And 8 Sleep for measuring it overnight. When we're working with women, what we'll do is we'll take 24-hour assessments, which is really insightful, using like a medical grade device that you wear, and you can take either 24-hour or anywhere up to 5 days. And what that allows us to do is to have a look and see what's going on all day. Because here's the thing is sometimes you might wake up not feeling refreshed and recharged and you're not quite sure why. But what we found is if you're redlining it all day, unfortunately that gets mirrored in your nights. And so we see those same habits and behaviors, they're showing up at night because we haven't down-regulated the nervous system. And so you may be asleep, but you're not recovering in the way that you should be. So we can then have a look at the day and say, okay, what about if we introduce certain behaviors? And they're different for different people. So does a certain type of breath work bring you more into the green zone? Is going out for a walk or regularly breaking up your day with walks, is that going to improve your HRV? Is just laughing, putting some music on, mucking around with your kids. You know, I often talk about, I had a mum in our program who has 5 children. And what was super interesting is that we would see really high rates of heart rate variability when she was with her children. Now, for many mums, right, this is a stressful environment trying to get 5 kids off to school. For her, that was so in alignment with her values, hanging out and spending time with them, that her heart rate variability was higher. And we know, you know, like if you're reading to your child, cuddling up in bed, you get this lovely release of oxytocin. So it really allows you to just pinpoint some of the habits and behaviors that are really helpful to you, that seem like non-traditional, if you like, in terms of the scientific world, but can bring you into that state of relaxation. And then we can capitalize on those by trying to introduce micro recoveries across the day. And what we then see is we see that pattern mirrored at night. And so we start to see deeper states of rest at night.
That's great. And you mentioned a word, which is a word that I've been thinking a lot about lately, as you know, word nerds often do, is this idea of capacity. I think that when we think about midlife in particular, you know, knowing who's listening to the show, it's a woman in midlife where, as you mentioned, parents are aging or caregivers are aging, maybe dying. And then we're also seeing our children grow up. They're becoming teenagers and young adults, which is, in my opinion, when the real parenting actually starts. It's when they become teenagers.
Me too, with teenagers.
With teenagers, yeah, they just know everything. It's amazing. And so I think that it is a very stressful time, and it is going to be orders of magnitude more difficult for someone to build a healthy plate when it's mealtime, you know, put in the right intensity and fortitude and grit in your, you know, resistance training or your cardiovascular, whatever your exercise program might be, if you are chronically stressed, not sleeping well. This is another, like maybe one of the top things I hear for women in perimenopause is this sleep dysregulation that they just can't seem to get a handle on. And so this idea of capacity through nervous system regulation. So I love that you've given a couple of examples, and really that is very highly individual. Like my HRV, Angela, is so terrible all the time. Like it is, I think there's a genetic component to it, but I just think that there's also some residue in my nervous system that I haven't quite fully cleaned up yet. But I do notice when I take a sauna, for example, right before bed, like an hour or two before bed, I have great sleep, great HRV, low resting heart rate overnight, drops to a really nice level. Again, sort of that low level activity that you were mentioning, like walks in between meetings, you know, walks after lunch, that kind of thing. That also really seems to improve at least my HRV. And I'm sharing this not just to talk about myself, because like I'm pretty boring, but just as ideas and like idea starters for our community. It's like, okay, if I want to increase my HRV, where do I start? And it's usually, at least it's been my experience when I've spoken to people, that increasing movement, like gentle movement, even yoga, breath work, like you mentioned, really seems to move the needle. Would you find that that's the case as well?
Yeah, 100%. And I think I did a great podcast on this with Paul Lawson, where he was talking about the benefits of not just zone 2, but zone 1 one, as you were saying, just going for a walk or sauna, and the benefits on the endocrine system and the immune system, and also improving your aerobic capacity at the same time. Because the thing is, as we see resting heart rate drop, as long as we're recovering well, and that is a recovery protocol when you're doing those activities, we see heart rate variability increase. And so for some people as well, like you can have individuals who've been very athletic in their younger years, and because they've done so much aerobic training, they have a higher heart rate variability, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're better at handling their nervous system, because if you get them to modulate it, they struggle. And so I think part of it's genetic, part of it is lifestyle, and then part of it is simply aging. And so if we can really address the lifestyle component, and we can then do things that help to make ourselves biologically younger, then we're influencing at least one, if not two pillars there in support of it. And I think it's often overlooked because, again, right, if we're type A personalities and we feel like we want to do everything, then we're like, oh my God, I've got to hit that zone 5. Or if I am doing zone 2, I've got to have a massive weight on my back and I've got to get to the very, very top. Do you know that threshold?
Right.
And you're like, really? What about just going out for a walk, being among the trees and all the lovely nitric oxide they release, and just like down regulating that nervous system and going, it's okay. It's okay, Angela, to just chill for 5 minutes. Do you know what I mean? I think
so funny. I always say my toxic trait is I start a zone 2 workout and it ends up as a zone 5 because I'm like, it can't be this easy. It must be hard.
I've got to push myself.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so how does HRV change over the menstrual cycle? Do we have any data around if it does change? Do we have less capacity, let's say, in the second half of the cycle versus the first? Like, what does it look like?
Yeah, it does. Exactly. So in the second half of the menstrual cycle, we do have less capacity and we see heart rate variability go down. And that seems to be the influence of progesterone. What's really interesting is that when women are and that's kind of a slight paradox, right? Because actually progesterone helps with GABA and makes you feel calmer. But as progesterone's higher, we seem to see a drop in heart rate variability. What I haven't seen, and I've been trying to dig into the research on this, is women who are taking progesterone. And quite a few of my program members will say my heart rate variability is dropping. And particularly if you're cycling progesterone, you'll see that if you're taking oral progesterone for 2 weeks out of the month, you'll see your heart rate variability drop. But I haven't
While
seen...
you're taking it.
While you're taking it, yeah. And I don't know if you have, but I actually haven't been able to find directly any studies where women have been studied in relation to the impact of taking progesterone on heart rate variability.
I haven't, and and there's many things that haven't been studied in women that we can certainly add to the pile there. Yeah. I think that there's what I've often observed my own self, and then just the women that I've counseled over the many years, as my tenure as a clinician and, kind of working in the space that I do, is that we're just more inflamed. In the second half, in that luteal phase, like we are more insulin insensitive, there's more prostaglandin, there's all these different things that are sort of being upregulated. Even our substrate availability, right? Like your body's like must build endometrial lining. So less glucose, less amino acids, less free fatty acids for you, mama. Yeah. It's all going into the uterus, right? So I think that we are just, and it's interesting. I have to go back and look at my data. I would probably agree that my HRV worsens in the second half of my cycle, but I find everything gets worse in the like my resting heart rate goes up in the second half of my cycle. Yeah. Sleep is often, body temperature elevates, that's progesterone. That's like, thanks progesterone. I know you're trying to calm me down, but also you're burning me up. So I think that there's a case to be made that maybe it's separate from the progesterone. Maybe it's like some of the other metabolic changes that are happening, right? So we're seeing less insulin sensitivity, and we're seeing some of these other substrates being diverted away from the woman and more to her womb. And that may be, I'm hypothesizing here with you, but that may be one of the reasons why we see the HRV degrade in the second half of the cycle.
Because your body's working so much harder. But it's interesting just that I'm seeing anecdotally and then with myself that progesterone when you take it, seems to have an impact on HRV, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. So... yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Because you said that it also seems to be worse on the people who... Well, there's some mechanism there that I haven't fully thought. I'm just sort of shooting from the hip right now. But that is a very interesting research question, for sure. And then just following that, when we're thinking about her and certainly in perimenopause, there's going to be some menstrual irregularities and to the eventual cessation of her menstrual cycle in menopause. What do we see with HRV in menopause?
So I think so with age, it's going down on the whole. And obviously some of this will come down to like taking hormones, not taking hormones. I also think it will, like, training history has an impact, but over your lifespan, your heart rate variability is dropping. So it's a little bit like VO2 max, right? VO2 max is dropping quite significantly. I think by as much as, if you're an untrained individual, by as much as 10% a decade. So I think this is where that zone 1 and 2 that we were talking about, in addition to some top end activity, is really, really important, because then you're helping to support that overall cardiovascular fitness, and you'll be simultaneously supporting heart rate variability at the same time, as long as you have that load correct, so that you're matching. There's a really interesting slide that I saw that Dr. Peter Attia showed in terms of when he looks at this kind of flattening off the curve in terms of that drop off, right? So we see most people are like healthy, and then unfortunately they get about this 15-year period of disease at the end of their life. And then you compare it to master athletes who seem to live quite a lot longer, but they also have more resiliency and better health. And I think that's the key thing when you're looking at something like heart rate variability, whether you're in your cycling years, your premenopause, your postmenopause. What you're looking at is to see that, have I got enough capacity to deal with everything in my life? And if not, I do need to prioritize me a bit more, and give yourself permission to do that.
Yeah, and I think in an ideal world, if you had a choice, you would like to just not wake up one day, right? It's like you would just like to be very blunt, and you would just like to just die, like you just want to be fine one day and then dead the next, versus this really slow, painful decline, with increasing disabilities, both cognitive and physical. And then, of course, increasing the burden on your family, and, the pain and the angst that your family sees in watching you die as well. So I think that your point there is well taken with capacity in general, physical and cognitive. If there is an ideal way to die, and certainly this is a very morbid topic and people don't like to think about death, but when I think about death, I like to joke that it's like, my hair is not the only dark part of me. Like, I have these dark thoughts and I think of these dark things. It's like, well, what's the best way to die? I would just like to go to sleep. Like, I would like to go to sleep one night and then just not wake up the next. Like, I just, totally healthy. No one was predicting it. And then, the next day, that's what happens. Late into my 90s, hopefully, as well, but lessening the burden. And I think that's just like the best way to go, if there is, a best way to go.
That would be the dream way, right? You just drift off and sleep, and that's it.
Yeah. So expanding on this idea of capacity and what happens in midlife with the stress sandwich and burnout, what are some of the ways you mentioned before? I really like this term that you use, micro resting. What are some ways that we might prophylactically prevent burnout? Maybe we can define what burnout is. And if certainly we can talk a little bit about, and it might be important here for context to really talk about your experience, your life as a sort of corporate lawyer and what that looked like, and then what, sort of what you learned in the process there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing with burnout, I'd say, is the World Health Organization has a definition of burnout, which involves also a degree of detachment from work, but it's a very workplace definition. And I think colloquially, it's being used more generally. And I think that's with good reason, right? Because actually, are we just being burnt out from things that are happening at work? Or is it that we feel burnt out because we've got so many things we're juggling in our lives? And we can talk about some strategies, like a bit like the micro recoveries, that can help downregulate that. For me, as a corporate lawyer for many years in London, I mean, in my 20s, I don't know about you, Stephanie, but I felt invincible. I thought I could just do anything, right? I had so much energy. I did not pay attention to any of the habits or behaviors that we're talking about, right? We completely disregarded sleep. I think it's the same for, doctors training in medical school, for example, and then not so much medical school, but when they have their training, things have got better now. But we were encouraged to pull all-nighters and weekends of work to get the deal done. And so that was my background, which I think had significant impacts on my adrenal health. I also, in my late 20s, started struggling with PCOS and endometriosis. So at the point at which I wanted to start a family, it looked like I wasn't going to be able to, and I needed to have surgery. So I'd had chronic pill use for many years to kind of cover over these symptoms, and just told, don't worry about it until
birth control pill?
Birth control pill.
Birth
yeah,
control. Okay.
from about 15, not for birth control, but because I had these symptoms, and the doctors were like, "Don't worry about it. When you want to have children, we'll address what it is." And so when I got to sort of 28, I was like, "Well, I think it's kind of time to address it." And that's when I discovered that I wasn't having a menstrual cycle, and so I had PCOS and endometriosis, and I needed surgery. So I was in this sort of position where it was like, okay, I've had all the surgery. The next 6 months is my best chance to fall pregnant. And so I had these two goals I was going for. One was, can I become a partner in my law firm? And the second is, can I get pregnant in a compressed amount of time?
In true type A fashion.
Type A fashion, exactly.
Yes.
So I released a bit of attachment. I was like, okay, we'll just see which one comes in. And then at 8 months pregnant, I was made partner. So they both came in, which was crazy. And my gynecologist, when I then went off on maternity leave, I said to him, well, this worked this time. It was great. I fell pregnant quicker than they had hoped, actually. They thought it might be a topic originally. What do you think I should do now? And he was like, well, go back on the pill again for 6 months and then come off and see. So by the time I was due to go back to work, I was now 3 months pregnant with my second child. Wow. So it was all kind of quite intense. And I had 3 children in just over 4.5 years. And I had 3 C-sections. I had pelvic disproportion, so I couldn't, it was intervened with a C-section, emergency one in the first one. And then I had 3 babies that had reflux. And I think nothing really prepared me for what was coming, because I never thought I would be somebody who struggled with postnatal depression. Like, I was high energy, type A personality, handling everything. And then it hit me. And each time it got successively worse. And it was after my third child, when she was 2 years old, that I remember being referred onto psychiatric care. And it was kind of like, we can't even call this postnatal anymore because she's 2. They diagnosed me with major depressive disorder, and I was on very strong antidepressant medication and antipsychotic medication to control for these moods, like these swings in mood, where one day I'll be super mum and I'm like, yeah, I've got it all covered. And I would honestly think I've got, this is it. I've got out of it. I'm fine. But then what we realized, my husband and I, over time, is that would precede the biggest crash. And so then I would have these crashes where I would feel completely low energy, really struggling to get out of bed, really depressed. And it was at that point that I contracted pneumonia as they were shifting medications and things. And at first they were treating me at home. So that was fine. I was taking antibiotics, but it wasn't working. And then they ran a chest x-ray and called me to the hospital and said, we need to see you urgently. And when I arrived at the hospital, they kept talking about my lymph glands and showing me these raised. And I was like, well, what are you saying? Because why are we talking about the lymph? We know I have pneumonia. It feels like you think there might be something else going on. And they were like, it's not possible to say without a CT scan. So I was then rushed through for a CT scan. And when I walked back into the doctor's office, his words were, it's worse than I thought, which is like not what you want to hear. And it turned out that fortunately for me, it was pneumonia and nothing worse with my lungs, but it had kind of taken hold across both lungs. It was viral and bacterial. And so I was rushed into hospital and I was neutropenic. My white blood cell count was so low. And it was at that point it took that really for me to take a good look at my life. And at that point, I was in this prison where I just didn't want to go on. It was in a prison of my own mind, my own creation. And I really had thought that my kids would be better off without me. But when I was in the hospital and I was faced with that, I remember them visiting me. And when they left, I was looking at photos on my phone and I felt this overwhelming sense of love. And you and I were talking at the beginning of this about the power of the mind on epigenetics. And as soon as I made a decision that I'm going to get well, I need to be a mum to my kids, my blood work changed within 48 hours. And my white blood cell count started to rise and I started to get better. And them having thought they would have to intubate me, they never did. And it was this sort of extraordinary recovery. And it was after that I started to get really into the world of health and wellness and try and figure out how I could get myself back on track. And hopefully we don't leave it until that point, right, to realize that the things we're engaging in are wrong. But for me, it was a really profound turning point.
And what was so you have this incredible turning point, this incredible recovery, and what changes with your mindset? Like, what was the difference between you're in the hospital, bacterial and viral pneumonia, you're losing all hope, you feel like you'd be better off without, or your children would be better off without you. What changes in your mindset? How do you start looking at your family differently? What does the lens switch look like?
It's a really great question, because originally I was feeling trapped and like I wasn't a great mother. And I just wanted to, honestly, all I wanted to do was turn the thoughts in my head off. I just wanted to switch them off. And that was the only reason I was thinking of ending my life. But I was in this trap of like this prison of how can I end my life and leave my kids without a mother? So I didn't know what to do and where to turn. When I was in the hospital, the key switch that took place for me was when I looked at them, I was like struck by how much they needed a mum and what the hell was I doing, and that I needed to get myself back on track. And I realized that I was spiritually detached. I'd been brought up in a very strict Catholic upbringing. I'd moved away from that. I was spiritually detached. I was emotionally, disconnected from myself, and I didn't like myself. I was physically now very unwell, and it gave me a sense of purpose, that I could get myself well, that there was hope, and that I could be there for them. And they were my North Star. I need to be a mum to these kids and not leave them without a mother, because it was looking like there was a really real possibility at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, to share something like that on publicly, even just to say it out loud, is difficult. So I appreciate you sharing that for our audience. And I guess, my follow-up question here is, how do you start liking yourself? So if you are, prior to this light switch going off for you, I would assume that if you felt like you were a bad mother, you were probably looking through the world with that filter and trying to accrue evidence to support that hypothesis, right? It's like, oh, I snapped at my kid, or I don't know, whatever it is, there's evidence of me being a bad mom. How do you switch from finding evidence to the contrary to, okay, I need to be there for my kids. And in order to do that, I need to free myself from this prison that you're talking about. So in order to do that, I need to like myself. So walk me through what that looks like. And I understand that this is, I understand that this is not like step one, go into the mirror. Like, I understand this is a very long, messy, non-linear path. But just to give, I know that there's people who are listening to this, myself included, who have had thoughts like that, who have had thoughts of like, this world will be better off without me than with me. So what was the path for you, and maybe in sharing some of the learnings that you've had along the way in terms of like the road to, maybe we'll call it self-love, but like liking yourself. How do you begin to like yourself?
Yeah, and it's hard, right? Especially if you part of that process can be inner child work that you have to look at. And you're right, it's not easy. It's not just step one, step two. I remember sitting with my therapist and her telling me that I needed to have more compassion, more self-compassion, and that I was putting pressure on myself. And it's like, how can you say that I'm putting pressure on myself? This is what I had to get over, of when I used to run multinational deals, and now it takes my 5-year-old an hour and a half to get me out of bed in the morning. I feel like a terrible mother. And my biggest win is taking them on the school run and actually getting there. How can I start to respect and love myself in that situation? And I think that the biggest breakthrough for me was when I started to realize that I am not my thoughts. That was empowering for me. I am not my thoughts, and that I had a choice of attaching to them or not. And in the early stages, you're absolutely right, it was hard work. It was a case of writing things down and analyzing what those thoughts were. And, Byron Katie has a great 4-step process for this of, do I know this to be true? Do I know this to be absolutely true and nothing else? How is that thought making me feel? I think this is it from memory. And then who would I be without that thought? And I used to write down these things and take them to my therapist, and we would work on them. And it was hard. And at the same time, I was then choosing to take behaviors that were pro-life, right? So I'm choosing to start exercising more. I'm choosing to eat in a way, if I'm nourishing my children, which I had so much love for them, and I'm giving them healthy food, I'm going to choose to eat healthily so that little bit by bit, I can build my strength and my health back up. Because, I was left with some damage, some asthma that came as a result of it. And so it was small steps, really small steps. And I think that's the power of small steps, isn't it? The power of compounding and this concept, James Clear talks about getting 1% better every day. And so if I could just get a little bit better in the way I ate, in the way I moved, in the way I slept. And it was messy. Honestly, Stephanie, it was messy in the beginning. I was on bipolar meds at night that I was washing down with wine. It wasn't pretty. And that was the only way I could get to sleep. And I would know that I would have a very short time to get into bed before I'd almost be passing out. The medication was so strong, it would give me night sweats. And I think the hardest thing for me is when I talk about it now, I'm not proud of it, but I've accepted it. And that, that person has still helped me get to where I am today. And hopefully when I share my story, it inspires other people that if they're going through tough times, there is a way through. And that's what I hope anyone listening, if you're going through something difficult, is tiny baby steps count. And over time, you can create a different future.
That's beautifully said. Thank you for that. You actually answered my question. My next question was, how long were you on the medication for? So I'm assuming neutrophils you're no longer neutropenic, you're discharged to the home, but still requiring medication. So how long after, at what point, I know now that you're no longer on, is it true to say that you're no longer on medication now?
Medication, yeah.
No longer on medication. So how long after that discharge, that aha moment, and we're saying you're climbing the proverbial mountain, let's say, right? So you're at rock bottom and you're trying to, scale Mount Everest, really. How long and this is a really good example, I might say before I ask the question, is where medication is absolutely necessary, right? So a lot of times you will hear people online, like absolutely no meds. You got to white knuckle this with diet and exercise. And in your case, this is absolutely not the case, because we might not be talking today if you didn't have the benefit of receiving that medication. That being said, I also have spoken to many psychiatrists on the show, on air, off air, around tapering and how vicious it can be to even just get off the medication. So I sort of have a second question kind of already coming down the pipeline for that. But my first question is, how long were you on the medication after that discharge from the hospital on your healing journey? And then when were you able to, with you and your, I'm assuming, evidence-based provider, obviously, to be able to begin that tapering?
Yeah, such great questions. And so what I would say as well as part of that, when you're talking, about clinical depression, I think you made a really good point there about sometimes medication is necessary, because the place that my mind was in, I wasn't able to do the work. So I probably wouldn't be here today. And I think that's an important thing for anyone listening, to not feel any shame around taking medication. I think that the important thing is, can you then give yourself the opportunity to start observing your thoughts and become the observer while you're on the medication, right? Because if we can get you or your medical team can get you to a point of balance, right? For me, then I was on the medication. So I left the hospital in May of 2014, and it took me until October of 2019 until I was medication free. So quite some time.
Great. No, but that is a reasonable timeline, especially with the magnitude and the intensity of what you were dealing with. I think so often you hear this 3 months, like not even 3 months. We don't even talk, we don't say 3 months, we say 12 weeks, it's like 90 days, we talk about it in these like little small chunks, and we absolutely underestimate we overestimate what we can achieve in a 90-day sprint. And really, when we really want to give ourselves a really nice cushioned runway, like a really long, doubling and tripling and sometimes 10xing the amount of time that you thought it was going to take, to give yourself the grace to mess up. And to give yourself the grace to wash down the meds with wine or whatever it is in the beginning as you're sort of picking yourself back up. I think that that's really important. And that comes back to that compassion piece that you were talking about. It's like, well, today it's got to be wine and the meds, but I know that maybe I won't be here in 2 years,
Yeah, so true. And I think that, when you're in that messy phase, right, you've just got to try, and it's just tiny little steps, as I say, of looking at your thoughts and starting to work with a therapist to view them through a different lens so you can make progress. I mean, I was personally told that I should never come off medication, and that although what I had was major depressive disorder with bipolar episodes, I didn't have bipolar. The fear was that I would become bipolar. And so I got to the point, and this has happened to me because obviously I had 3 bouts originally. I had postnatal depression, is that with medication, what I found, and I'm not in any way giving any medical advice here, but I became numb. So the point at which I felt I didn't need the medication anymore was that, yes, I wasn't getting these extreme highs and lows, but I also wasn't able to really enjoy life and experience the joy, and I wasn't experiencing the downer. So there was this element of numbness. And it was at that point that I wanted to come off my medication. My psychiatrist didn't want to address it. I fortunately had a really, really good GP who had been with me through the whole journey. And I said to him, I'd like to try and come off. And he was like, Angela, we will do this only once. And I went slower. To answer your question about how did I taper, I went slower than he suggested. I found I had to go really, really slowly. So the first thing that I did was to remove the antipsychotic medication. And in any of these medications, what I found is that I experienced depression at every reduced dose. And so I had to get myself to a point where I was strong enough to know that this was withdrawal from the medication as opposed to true depression. And so I would titrate down a little bit and then get to a point where I'm like, I'm okay with this. And then a tiny bit and a tiny bit until I'd removed one medication, and the same with the second. So I started that process in January of 2019, and it took me until the end of October. That was my personal experience. Obviously, I can't advise anyone.
Sure. And everybody knows here, you're not a medical doctor. You are not giving medical advice. That's clear here. I'm actually surprised that it was only 9 months that you started. Like I've had, patients who there's been co-management of, a variety of issues that we're dealing with, and they have their GP or their psychiatrist, and it's like 2 to 3 years of a taper. And it's literally the hardest thing. Like I've had patients say like, this is going to kill me. Like getting off of the meds was actually harder in some cases, not all, but getting off of the medications, the antipsychotics in particular, seem to be very difficult to wean off of.
They're not great medication. Yeah, they're very hard. And I think that's why I say go slowly. And even if some days it's almost 2 steps forward, 1 step back is what I found. It would be like when I found you would think that when you get down to the lowest dose of that medication, you can just cut it. I couldn't. I was halving the tablets. Then I was doing like every other day protocols. Like I went so gently in that process. That's what helped me to do it. I think something we could talk about, is the other thing that happens is for women who've had mental health problems is these can come back in perimenopause. And I wasn't prepared for that. Yeah. That was a bit of a shock.
So in 2019, your age was?
In 2019, I was 43.
43. And so as you've been, last 5 years, as you've been sort of 5 years, 6 years. My gosh, can I do math? We're in 2025, 6 years.
6 years now, yeah.
So 6 years now. So have there been resurgences? Have you felt like some of those symptoms or those clues, like those almost that, you would have these highs and then you knew that the crash was coming down afterwards. Have you been having or experiencing any of that in perimenopause? And if so, what have been some of the strategies that you have employed?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think something that's not talked about enough, right, and also women who've had any sort of mental health problems, but some women who haven't can experience it. I have had ups and downs. For me, one of the biggest pieces, and we often talk about perimenopause not going well with alcohol, was then giving up alcohol. And I wouldn't say never. I'm never the type of person to say, I'll never drink again. But in 2022, I'd given up alcohol for about 30 days at a time. I then decided I'm going to do 90 days and I haven't drank since. So I'm nearly at 1,000 days of no alcohol. That has been the biggest mood stabilizer for me, not touching alcohol. I think because of it has that depressive effect. I think there's other life circumstances. My father died coming up to 3 years ago. I think grief will plunge you into a state that looks very similar to depression. And I think it's hard, isn't it, when you've had depression to try and field around that. And that's where I felt like, I actually now want to find a situation where I no longer look outside of myself. And so alcohol felt like that last piece. But again, like we were talking about micro recoveries or micro habits, tiny behaviors, I never said I'm never going to drink again. And I'm not even saying that to this day. It was like, can I do this for a period of time? And then as I got a streak, I found that after a year, my mood became so much more stable. And I think that in perimenopause, for many women, alcohol can be quite challenging, just a small amount. And I don't want people to misunderstand this. I was by no means an alcoholic. I didn't really get drunk. I'm talking about I just used to have 1 or 2 glasses of wine to relax. That was the person, but it was regular in the beginning. And so for me, I found that alcohol doesn't really have its place. And I've continued to work on myself. Exercise is a massive, massive thing for me. So I am religious about morning movement because that primes my brain in the right way. And I think we can get tied up sometimes in and I'm not saying any of this is wrong because I've done so much therapy and I think it has a really important place. But sometimes we can just be going over and over things when our physiology can move our psychology quicker. So for me, that daily practice of exercise is a big one.
Yeah, I love that. And I think grief is one of those things it can, because we as a society, we don't really talk about it. We just, someone dies, we bring food, we all cry together in a home or at the funeral or, whatever the cultural tradition might be. And then the person who has lost, the immediate family is just sort of like left, right? We sort of feel like, oh, we don't want to disturb them. We don't want to bother them. And seeing this sort of firsthand with friends who have lost partners and what have you, people can get completely overwhelmed. We don't have the tools, right? And this is really when we start to lean on other people and everyone else sort of gets back to their lives, or they feel awkward. They don't know what to say or do. So we just sort of disappear and you're sort of left to your own thoughts. And grief, I think, comes up in midlife. Like this is when it starts. We start to see, the decay and the decline of health of our loved ones. And so even just having this conversation, I think, can be helpful in even if it's just like you're not alone. If you've lost somebody, right? You're listening to this and you've lost someone of importance to you, like you're not alone. And there is, certainly there's help, and we'll make sure that we put some resources for, Europe, which I know you're based in London, of course, and then we'll put some resources for the United States and Canada if things are getting really bad and you really don't have a, social network to lean on. There's always government programs that will help, that can help. There's you can text people, you can call people. There's suicide hotlines and all of these kinds of, and the grief counseling, and there's all of that. But this is something that, again, this is, back to the beginning of our conversation around nervous system regulation and capacity. Not to say that you should have the capacity to deal with the loss of a significant, like you don't have to muscle your way through it. But all of the things that we've been talking about today, the cap on, the cap off, the HRV, and we'll talk about exercise and food in just a moment, but all of that increases your capacity, and it increases not just your physical capacity, but your mental faculties and your mental capacity as well. Because, motherhood, being an adult, a woman in midlife is very, very difficult for a variety of reasons. And the more that we can do to sort of nourish ourselves and take care of ourselves, the more that we can, be able to pivot when something happens, when something catastrophic happens.
That's so true. And I think we can sort of ignore it, right, until we're faced with it. But I would say try not to wait for something to kind of butt up against you in order for you to address yourself. Like that connection piece with yourself is so important. I think as women, we're really intuitive and we have that inner knowing, and we just need that compass to guide us right throughout our lives. And that's something like looking at Dr. Lisa Mosconi's work and things like that. We become more empathetic, right? That's where the good news is coming post-menopause, right? We're more empathetic than ever before, but we also kind of give less fucks, as she says, excuse my French. And, so we're more relaxed. That's coming. But I do think that you can ignore that part of your life by kind of just going to dinner parties and drinking wine and just brushing it all under the carpet, or you can really get to know yourself.
Yeah, and the wine piece is interesting too. I think that I know that there's Bettys that are listening that are like, oh, they're talking about wine again. Wah, wah. Like, I don't want to I still want my champagne. I still want my red wine. I still want my Chardonnay, whatever. And it's so ingrained in our culture, right? So, it's like you want to go for dinner. The waiter's like, and what would you like to drink tonight? Before your food even gets there, like the wine menus alongside the food menu. And there's always memes like, oh, it's 5:00 somewhere, it's time to, pop open that bottle or whatever. I, like you, maybe slightly more extreme, well, I won't say that. I'll say I, like you, have adopted a no alcohol policy. I never feel good. I don't feel good on it. I don't really enjoy the taste. I know that a lot of people like taste. I don't really enjoy it. My sleep is trash because whenever I drink alcohol, it's usually in the evening with dinner. It's like just trash. everything. I feel bloated the next day. I feel sluggish the next day. My workouts stink, like everything awful. I even find like transparently, like I even find like my body odor is different. Like I smell different. I don't know what it like. I don't know. So I just don't like it. I don't like it. So I never drink. Like never. We have, in our home has every home that's like, it has like a little wine thing. It's like, nah, we store our olive oil there.
Olive oil. That's the thing. I think you can get us into wine and tasting notes with olive oil and coffee.
Yeah.
That's what I found, right?
Yeah, 100%. So you mentioned exercise, and certainly exercise as it relates to mental health. We know that it is at least as effective as many of the medications that are often offered, like SSRIs and MAOIs, and it doesn't have some of the side effects that some of the medications have. So it's a very good idea if you are on those medications to be regularly practicing exercise, and as a way to dose yourself with some of the neurochemicals that make you feel good. Certainly exercise is like, and when I say dose, I mean that intentionally: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, DOSE. So let's talk a little bit about what your exercise protocol maybe looked like when things were a little bit ugly, a little bit messy in that recovery period, and then how that's evolved over time now.
Yeah, for sure. So in that recovery period, I mean, one of the things I did there was to get a personal trainer, because that means that it meant I had someone I was accountable to. And obviously I was working on the nutrition and my gut health and things at the same time. But then that individual needs to be someone you can trust, that they're not going to push you too hard when you're in recovery. For me now, what does it look like? I am a big fan, like you, Stephanie, of lifting weights. I think it makes you feel strong. I think it helps with confidence. I think it's just amazing for muscle strength, power. I do some HIIT training for speed and power as well. It helps with insulin sensitivity. And as someone with PCOS, I'm fully aware that that is not a hormonal disorder so much as it is a metabolic disorder at its core. So that continues post-menopause. So managing my blood sugar is really key for me. And then, so I do a combination of strength or resistance training coupled with some speed work, so some sprint interval training, and then some zone 2. So whether that's on my carol bike, in the gym, or going out for a walk in nature, I tend to go across all of those. And then they'll just split it across the year, right? So there'll be more of a focus on one area. For using the 90-day sprint example, right? I might focus at something for 12 weeks at a time, with a little deload in between, where I'm more on, say, the aerobic fitness, or I might be more on the strength, or more in that kind of hypertrophy range, so that I'm hitting it. Because I don't think we have to do everything at once. But the key thing for me has been moving my body. And that doesn't have to be, it can be some yoga in the morning. It can be just zone 2, a walk or something like that. But for me, the regular thing, I guess I'm a bit of an all or nothing personality. It's just much easier for me to say I do or I don't drink, because I'm a bit extreme, and I do exercise. And so if I just commit to moving my body every day, I reduce some of that decision making. And that's something as well, when we look at recovery, if you want to talk about in a moment, just shifting of cognitive gears is something we haven't touched on, and how that can help manage stress as well.
Let's go there.
Should we go there now?
Yeah.
So this is something that originally I think I came across this concept from James Hewitt, who looked at, when we look at training, we talk about heart rate zones. And so we have like generally people talk about 5 heart rate zones, but you could sort of lump them together, right? We have zone 1 and 2, and then you have zone 3, 4, and then you have your top end zone 5. And we can think of cognitive gears like that as well. So we have high gear, we have medium gear, and we have low gear. And I think what's happening for many women who are busy like ourselves is that we are in high gear a lot, particularly if we're productive and we're really getting down to some deep work, we will be in high gear. But then we're also spending a huge amount of time in medium gear. So email, task switching, looking at social media, posting, all these things. These are medium gear activities, and they have quite a big cognitive drain, but they're not necessarily giving you like massively moving the needle on your results and your efforts. But what we're not doing is moving, just like we want to do that top end stuff in terms of zone 5 training, and then we want to have some zone 1 and 2 for recovery. We want to do the same with our brain. So if we've been in high gear, what we now need to do is shift into low gear. But a lot of people will take a low gear activity and make it medium gear because we start multitasking. So we decide that when we're driving, we're going to listen to a podcast. When we're folding laundry, we're going to do something, right? There's always something that we're doing, or we're going to phone a friend. And so now we're in medium gear a lot of the time. And so if you can just think about, because I know your audience is really into fitness and does these things with their training, with their physical training, maybe start thinking about your mental training in that way and go, okay, I've been doing this. I've been in high gear. This is going to be depleting me. If I want to go back into high gear again, and that's when you feel, by the way, most connected, right? It's when you encounter a flow state, you're much more likely to, which makes you more productive. How can you get back into that? We'll switch into an activity that's low gear. So don't step away from your desk and immediately look at your phone and get a cheap dopamine hit. Just keep it away and maybe go step outside and take a walk. Or if you're going to go fold the laundry, you could just be with your thoughts for a few minutes, because anything that you've delegated, right, to your subconscious mind, like driving, if we were driving together and we started chatting, we're probably not going to crash the car. We're still going to be able to do all the things we need to do just fine because it's delegated. It's a low gear activity. Just making time to be in that low gear and connect with yourself can help with that and replenishment.
I love this concept of like zone 1 and 2 cognitive gears and zone 3, 4, and 5 cognitive gears as well. I think that is so brilliant. And as you were talking, like, of course, I only do high gear. I only do my VO2 max training once a week. Like I'm only, like when I'm doing my Norwegians, like my 4x4s, like that's once a week. It's not all the time. So give us just a little sampling if you might, and you've already done some, but maybe what are some zone 1, zone 2, or some low gear, like cognitive activities that we might be thinking about that we want to intersperse or put some space between our high gear activities?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So you can intersperse them across the day. So going out for a walk would be a low gear activity. If you're stepping away and you're just having quiet time. If you're going down, surprisingly, like after dinner, for example, you're clearing up, you'll be in a low gear activity. If you're like loading the dishwasher or something like this. For those of you that like me, I actually don't do very much of it because I don't have time, so it gets outsourced.
Well, that's why I asked. I'm like, tell me more, because I don't have a good repertoire of
the low gear. But you know what's a really like satisfying for me, and I say I outsource this one, is ironing's just a beautiful thing. Do you not like love the concept of creases going away? Like there's just something magical, right? It starts crumpled and now it looks beautiful. So satisfying. But yeah, sadly, busy women, right? We're going to outsource some of these beautiful low gear activities. But I think it's more about not trying to multitask or constantly check email and set times of day, because it's the medium gear activities that are going to really deplete you. Do you know what I mean? And when you get to the end of that day and you're just like, I don't have any reserves left for my family. And that's when in perimenopause, as you know, your mood can be a little bit less stable. And then you've got teenagers who've also got hormone things going on. And you're like, hang on a minute.
Who also have unstable moods.
Exactly. Who also have unstable. And you're like, did we just end up in a fight because of me or because of you? Or is it just I have less capacity? I don't know. So it's trying to avoid some of that.
I love that. That's my big takeaway from this conversation. Certainly you've shared so candidly and so honestly. So thank you for sharing your struggle. I know it's going to help, but that is a huge takeaway for me, is low gear activities. And I think that that's a really good exercise for anyone who's listening. Like, what are some of the low gear activities that you can be doing that don't take a lot of brain power, but are incredibly replenishing, right? Like what you were saying, like the ironing, the crispness of that nice collar, all the things that, or steaming, something like that. For me, I actually
tidying up. That's another one, right?
That's one of
my so satisfying, decluttering.
I got to tell you, I watch. This is like, I'm totally hanging myself out here, but on my algorithm knows how much I like to clean. I get like clean porn on my Instagram feed. Like I get like close-ups of people like steaming the corners of the bathroom tiles. So and I just lap that a lot. So I personally love, one of the ways that I relieve stress is through cleaning. The tendon befriend response, right? The female tendon befriend. So I like to like sort of putter around in my environment. My favorite thing is at the end, like dinner is done, we're cleaning up, and in my house we call it closing the kitchen. So we like everything is in the dishwasher, the sink. There's no little food things in the sink. There's no like coffee beans from the morning or whatever. No rice or all the things that get thrown in the sink. And then I just have this nice little spray that I've made with vinegar and some essential oils that I spray on the countertop, and like all the crumbs are gone, the fingerprints are gone, and that's like that makes it's so satisfying. It's my favorite
clean
thing.
Worktop, right? Just nothing clear. Yeah.
And then the next morning when I come downstairs, I don't see like remnants and residue from yesterday. It's like a fresh day in the kitchen, that kind of thing. So that's my I know that that's my one thing that is so satisfying for me. As you were talking, I'll share one more just to inspire thought in my community. The other thing that I love to do is dermaplane. So like the razor on your skin, like to sort of take away all the little peach fuzz on your face. I mean, I don't have peach fuzz. I'm Lebanese and Portuguese, so it's like full on hair. So I have to sort of maintain this, or else you won't be able. You'll like my two eyebrows become one and all the things. So okay, all right, yeah. So the other thing I love. In terms of a low level activity, now that I'm thinking about it, and I share this not just as an idea starter for our Betties, is like skincare rituals and routines. Like I love to dermaplane. So when you take that little razor and like take off all the peach fuzz, or even just in the evening where you're putting on some serums or some lotions, you're putting your hair up, hair oils, that kind of thing. That also it gives me a lot of pleasure, but I think that that's also a low level. Would you classify that as low gear?
Yeah, that would be a low level, exactly like brushing your hair. And also, when you were describing about like tidying up and having clear surfaces and things like that, if you have if you have a lot of clutter around you, I think it's immediately shifting you into that medium gear because your brain's having to take in all this stuff and filter it out. So the more kind of clear, the tidier you are, the more you can shift between high and low.
Angela, I have to thank you so much. We were talking before we got going, and if people want to find out more about you and your work, where can we direct people in the interwebs to find you?
In the interest. Thank you. So my podcast, which Stephanie has been on, really popular episode, is High Performance Health. On Instagram, I'm at Angela S. Foster. And then my website, something that your audience might like to do is we have a Superwoman quiz, right? Where you can score yourself on these behaviors that we've been talking about. The way that I would summarize them all is how do you make the shift, right? So if you want to shift your health and performance in 2025. And so we score you on sleep, hormones, insights, the way you fuel your body and the way you train your body and mind, and they can go and take that and have fun and play with it over at yourtotalhealthcheck.com.
So we'll make sure those are all clickable links for everyone. And then I am looking forward to the next time that I get to see you in person, hopefully be at the next Health Optimization Summit, and we'll be able to like continue the conversation. This has been wonderful.
Continue the conversation. Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been so much fun. Thank you, Stephanie.